Welcome back. Former President Donald Trump pleaded not guilty in a federal courtroom within the last hour to the 4 felonies relating to his alleged attempts to overturn the 2020 election.
The former president and current frontrunner for the GOP's 2024 nomination is charged with conspiracy to defraud the United States, conspiracy to violate civil rights, conspiracy to obstruct an official proceeding, and actual obstruction of that official proceeding. This is the 3rd criminal indictment against Trump in the last 4 months.
Now here to discuss the political ramifications of these latest charges are Republican strategist Jamie Roe, as well as Democratic attorney Butch Hollowell. Thank you both for being here tonight.
Nice to be here.
Thanks for having us.
So, look, Trump is leading the way with that Republican nomination by a wide margin. Do either of you expect this to change anytime soon with what we saw today?
Well, I think if the past is a determiner of how things are going to go, I would think it strengthens President Trump, to be honest with you. And I'll just say up front, he's not my first choice to be our next president. But the fact of the matter is the New York Times Siena College poll came out yesterday that had the race tied 43-43 after everything that's happened so far. So if anything, I think they're locking in a great deal of President Trump's support, while at the same time further dividing the nation. I do not think that these prosecutions are correct, and I think it's damaging to people's faith in our justice system here in this country.
Another poll did come out today, though, a Reuters poll saying almost half, about 45% of Republican voters would not support the former president if he were convicted. But it's highly unlikely that he would be convicted prior to this election, right, Butch?
Well, that's right. You know, and part of the legal strategy is to delay. I think the president's lawyers, President Trump's lawyers, are trying to do everything they can to see whether he can win again. And if he does, then he would have jurisdiction over the Justice Department. You know, it invokes those days when President Nixon was facing Watergate, and they had the Saturday night massacre after it looked like Special Prosecutor Archibald Cox was going to move forward. He fired him, then he fired the next one, finally got Bork in place. But so I agree. That's what the poll did say. And even 17% in the New York Times Siena poll indicated that many of his supporters do believe he did violate the law, but it still didn't shake their ability to say that he should be in office. But the law should lead where the law leads, and Jack Smith is he's a bulldog. He prosecuted mob figures when he was in New York, and he prosecuted war criminals. I guess what I would pivot to is this. I think the most significant thing that's come out in the most recent indictment from the January 6th piece was Vice President Pence's testimony. That was the bombshell. And I'll just read what he said to the grand jury. Vice President Pence testified under oath, quote, "I was clear with President Trump throughout all the way up to the morning of January 6, 2021. It wasn't just that they asked for a pause. The president specifically asked me, and his gaggle of crackpot lawyers asked me to literally reject votes, return votes, essentially to overturn the election." That's a bombshell, and it's a crime.
This is the 2nd federal indictment against the former president. Do you think at any point, because this is becoming essentially a circus with what's going on, at any point he'll be asked to step aside? And if you were advising him, would you ask him to step aside?
You know, I'm not advising him, but I think he has to do what he thinks are in his best interest. I'm assuming he's running because he thinks he has something to offer the country. I think at some point it's going to become a greater strain on his campaign, simply because you have so many things to juggle. You know, but the interesting thing that Bush talked about, the bombshell from Vice President Pence, having a crackpot lawyer is not a crime. Okay, a lot of lawyers can give you bad legal advice. That is not a crime to listen to your lawyer's bad legal advice. And the fact of the matter is, one thing I will note, we're going through a process here in Michigan right now with false electors who've been indicted by Dana Nessel. Now, in Jack Smith's indictment, he says that these electors were tricked into signing these forms that they would be used only if President Trump were to win his legal cases, while Dana Nessel is saying that they willingly, knowingly did it. I don't think both things can be true at the same time. Either they were tricked or they weren't tricked. And being tricked shouldn't be something where you want to put an 81-year-old great-grandmother from Paw in prison for 70 years. And that's basically what they're facing here in Michigan. I think the bad part is that Democrats have now decided that they're going to conduct lawfare against their political opponents. And you see it where the legal case is being brought. They're being brought in Washington, D.C., they're being brought in New York City, they're being brought in Lansing, all places that are completely controlled by the Democrats.
Except for the ones in Florida.
I don't think that is fair to the process, and I also think it definitely deludes people's trust and faith in the justice system. And quite honestly, if we lose faith in our system of justice in this country, then we've lost it. We cannot be the democratic republic that we are.
I got to jump in here. So we're losing our faith in the justice system a lot of times because of the Supreme Court and the shenanigans that are going on there. But let's take the point that was just made, where these cases are being brought. You bring the cases where the crime is committed. And so it was a risk for Jack Smith to bring the taking of the official documents case in Florida because it's so conservative, but he decided to do it anyway because that's where Mar-a-Lago is, even though a jury may be more conservative there. But let's look at what also he said. You know, it says that the president, and he has it on page 5 and page 6 of the indictment, he specifically sought out legislators, and he specifically knew that in pressuring these legislators to try to get them to change the electoral process, all to put pressure on staying in power. You can get advice from crackpot lawyers, but what the prosecutor says is he knew and told aides that he knew it was wrong and still did what he did in order to hold on to power. That's a crime.
And that's the crux of this case.
Did
he truly believe what he was arguing and what he was attempting to convince other people?
And then look at what he told the groundskeeper in the other case, in the documents case. He said, you go in there at night and try to delete the videotapes of moving the boxes around at Mar-a-Lago. So he was clear, it wasn't some lawyer's advice. This guy has testified, the groundskeeper, this was on the boss's orders. This was on Trump's orders. He was obstructing justice.
What role does fatigue play in all of this? There's so much fatigue on either side of the aisle. Do you think, Jamie, and I wonder, does it have anything to do with you saying that he's not your top choice for a candidate? Right. Will it help or hinder his re-election campaign?
Yeah, that still remains to be seen. I'm a believer that in this election, we are facing we just had our credit downgraded as a nation yesterday because of all the profligate spending that's going on in Washington, D.C. and the financial mismanagement.
And the debt ceiling battles that were involved with both parties in the Capitol.
because Republicans wanted to control spending, okay? And those are real problems that impact American families. Quite honestly, this whole process here and these prosecutions that are going on all across the country, one thing, the greatest thing about all of this that happened is the Constitution worked. The Electoral College on January 6th was interrupted by, or the count of the Electoral College vote was interrupted by the violence at the Capitol. But they still came back and did their jobs. And I give the members of Congress and I give the Vice President Pence and everybody else who did their jobs great credit for having the bravery to stay there and do this important work of our Constitution. The Electoral College votes in Michigan worked. The false electors weren't accepted. And the fact of the matter is, if we continue down this path to prosecute our political opponents, they're not going to have control forever. And what you do when you do this is turnabout is fair play. So I think that they have to be very careful on that side. And I also think it's very interesting that every one of these Jack Smith indictments has come one day after big news on the Hunter Biden, Joe Biden influence peddling scandal broke. Every single one of them was the day after big news broke on that, and it's to distract attention away from I think, real crimes that have gone on previously with Joe and Hunter Biden.
Well, Republican strategist Jamie Roe and Democratic attorney Butch Hollowell, thank you so much for being here and the insight on this topic.
Thank you very much.